Hi, everybody. Welcome to Soul Sessions with KK. I'm your host, KK, and I'm here with the fabulous Dr. Shana Frydman. Dr. Shana Frydman is the executive director of Shalom Task Force, and she is here to talk about domestic violence and abuse. So I'm just going to have her take it away. Thank you, Dr. Shana Frydman, for being on the show.
Thank you, KK, for having me. It's really wonderful we're able to do this together. We've been talking about it for a while.
Yes.
And your reach and your ability to really reach people is so important because so much of our work at Shalom Task Force is about awareness, right? People don't know what's going on and we want to be able to help them get the help they need. So I'm Shana Frydman. I'm the executive director of Shalom Task Force, and I'm a social worker by training. And I worked in the front lines of domestic violence in New York City for many years, more than I'm willing to admit. And I work with Orthodox and Jewish clients who are survivors of domestic violence. And 2 years ago, I took the position over at Shalom Task Force to be the executive director. And I felt really passionate about taking this position because I feel like Shalom Task Force is a voice for Jewish survivors. So what is Shalom Task Force? The Shalom Task Force is a national organization based in New York our mission is to combat domestic violence and help people foster healthy, safe relationships. And we do that through 3 core services. And we could talk about that together today, is our hotline. Our hotline, which is a telephone service, and recently expanded to a text chat WhatsApp service, and I'll talk about that. We're very excited about that. We have education programs. So sometimes it just is be on a podcast, right? Just getting out there and talking about it, because the more we talk about it, the more we help people. But we go into many schools. I think last year we went to almost 30 Jewish day schools, talk about healthy dating, reaching over 1,800 kids. Last year, our community programs touched 6,500 unique individuals. So out there talking about domestic violence, out there talking about healthy relationships, doing workshops with couples, making sure they have the skills to be with each other in a healthy way. And then we have legal services for people who need to figure out what legal remedies exist out there if they need to be safe. So that could be orders of protection, child custody issues, but also going to Beit Din, right? And how do you deal with the Beit Din system? And our lawyers are trained in that. They know how to go to Beit Din, they know how to work with their banim. So we try to offer all the services to help people stay safe, and that's what we do. Our goal is really to help people stay safe. So that's what Shalom Task Force is.
So I know you've been an incredible resource for so many Jewish women. Do you also cater to non-Jewish women?
So we'll serve anyone who approaches us, but the reality is, and you'll see this throughout the United States, and it's interesting, we're funded through the federal government for this, is for an underserved community. So often when it comes to family issues, people are more comfortable going to an agency that's just familiar with their cultural, we're not a Jewish agency, we're an agency that serves the Jewish community, like understand their cultural needs. So I have colleagues in the Muslim community, in small insular immigrant communities. I work with a group that works in the hard of hearing deaf community, because people have different needs, though the issues are universal. And I don't want to say like Jewish domestic violence is different than this domestic violence. And we'll talk about the definition of domestic violence, and I should have started with that. But so we do serve anyone that approaches us and who needs us. We absolutely do. But to be perfectly honest, 98% of the people who approach us self-identify as Jewish. We don't always know where they fall in the Jewish community, and sometimes it's disclosed, sometimes they don't. It's not that important. But we want to make sure, because if you're someone who's a survivor of domestic violence, you need to go to court, it is certainly easier to go with an attorney who understands the get issue, or certainly understand if you're dealing with support issues to understand why it's important to have a day school tuition, yeshiva tuition considered. Where if the lawyer isn't even aware of why that's important, then it's much harder. So, but certainly they can help. I'm not saying they can't, but that's really our focus is making sure that those who wouldn't go to the other services have a place to come.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so when I hear domestic violence, automatically the first thing that comes to my head is physical violence. And I think I'm not alone in that, because, you know, even when I was spreading information about Shalom Task Force, and I even refer people to call the hotline, like, I'm not being like physically abused, like this isn't abuse. I said, this has nothing to do with, physical abuse. It's much more than that. There's a lot of nuance. So can you just explain to the audience what abuse means?
It's so important to understand that. So I think all of us, right, when we hear the word domestic violence and the literature will talk about intimate partner violence or spousal abuse, we think of black and blue marks, right? That's what we think about because that's like the obvious one. But if you take a step back, we're talking about many forms of abuse that are about power and control in a relationship. And it's about one party in the relationship obtaining and maintaining power and control over the other party. And people do that in many different ways. And I'm going to say the victim is she, and I'll use the person that hurts the abuser is he, but we see male victims. And I want to put that, if there are men listening, and I hope there are men listening, we serve male victims. So, but, just the reporting is typical. That's just, so, he can use many forms of abuse. And I kind of think that as the toolkit of the abuser, right? So there's the physical violence, right? But we really, the best way of visualizing is like this circle, and it's called the power control wheel, where power control is the central dynamic, and the other these behaviors empower that, right? So it can be verbal, emotional abuse using language, isolation, big red flag, right? Keeping her away from resources, sexual violence. And that's also often misunderstood because there's an assumption within marriage, and we're talking about a community that marries, right? That there's an assumption that there can't be marital rape or sexual abuse, and there can be, and there often is. We're talking about financial abuse, and we're not talking about budgets, right? Budgets are not financial abuse. We're talking about having no access to funds, or stopping her from having a job, or ruining her credit without her knowing, right? Really financial abuse. We've had clients who can't get feminine hygiene products, like that's not on the family budget, right? Or I worked with a client who was married to someone who was a triple board certified physician. There was no financial issue in the home, but she was coming to a food pantry because he had no access to money for food, right? So how does that control her, right? So and you talk about spiritual abuse, which is really interesting in our community, right? Is using spirituality and using her relationship, and in our community we talk about Hashem, but her relationship with her identity and her relationship with religion as a way to control her. So, you can think of different ways. Examples I've seen is, there is the sexual coercion or force during the nida time when, it isn't acceptable by halacha, by Jewish law, to have sexual relations. So that's very extreme. So it's both sexual and spiritual. But there are things like not letting her have money for food for Shabbat, and her sense of being able to prepare for Shabbos, and her sense of identity as a Jewish woman, right? Not allowing her to have relationships with her parents, and her feeling that she cannot be mechabed. She cannot honor her parents, right? It ruins her relationship. And there's a lot of these examples. And the get issue, certainly, right? The idea of withholding a get is the ultimate form of spiritual abuse, where they can remain spiritually married. He has that control of her, does not give her the ability to even date in the community because of his power and control. And we've seen many cases, unfortunately, where there's a civil divorce. They're not married in the eyes of our country, but he has control. So we're talking about, I talked about financial, emotional, verbal, spiritual. Now we have cyber abuse, digital abuse, right? Yeah, and this is like one of those ones that are really interesting. Those of us who have kids, and my kids are young, I'll admit, but those of us who have kids or teenagers with phones, we love the idea of being able to locate people, right? But if you're being controlled by your abuser, he could see where you're going. So if they're coming to see a therapist, they'll know when they're going to the therapist. They'll know where they're going. Or all that technology we have in our homes. I recently heard a speech by a survivor who talked about how her abuser used all this technology to record everything. So she had no privacy. He would keep noise on when he was away on business trips in the house, so she couldn't sleep, and there was sleep deprivation. So using technology, getting into your text, so there's a lot of cyber abuse. So there are a lot of examples of different types of abuse, using children, using community. So we have to move away from being physical abuse being the only definition. Physical abuse exists, and certainly that's the highest fatality risk, right? So if we're talking about a safety assessment, I don't know if this is getting too graphic, we're talking about really fear for people's life, we really do review issues around like physical abuse, because that's what leads to, unfortunately, severe harm, injury, God forbid, death. But when we're talking about the dynamic of living in an abusive relationship, there's typically many forms of abuse going on. I'm sure I forgot a few on my wheel, but check out our website. It has all that information.
It's on your website. Got it. I'm going to look at it.
When you look under what is abuse, we really need to, as a community, move away from that, because then we could validate people's experience. I recently ran a supportive support group. I call it Supportive Conversation, an online one during COVID for 8 weeks for women who identified as being in either they left an abusive relationship or they're alone in COVID in an abusive relationship. And I said, the question of the week was, what do you wish other people understood about domestic violence? And the answer from all the women was like that it's not only physical. That is what people want. They want people to understand. The women, the survivors themselves, and we call them survivors even if they're still in the relationship, the survivors themselves want people to know that I don't have to be black and blue to be in a relationship in which I'm controlled and I have no sense of identity. So yeah, I mean, I think that's really important. And so that also plays into like, how do you, like, what are the red flags then, right?
Yeah, how does one know?
Right, how does one know? And you know, sometimes you don't. And I'm sorry to say that sometimes you don't. So we put out there, like, if something feels wrong, then let's deal with it early in the relationship. I love your cup. That's fabulous.
Okay.
Talking about this hard stuff.
I need my tea.
So like the question is, so there are times that people don't know. Though when you speak to the survivors when they're coming out of it or they're in treatment to think about it, they'll look back. They'll say, well, we were dating, you know, he only bought presents that he wanted. He never thought about my concerns. I didn't make any of the decisions around the wedding. I had no voice. Now, certainly all of us in our relationships, we all, I don't want to call it power imbalance, but like we all, like I'm much more involved in my children's education. My husband does much more of this. Like, you know, we kind of split things, but do I have a voice? And that's often the question I ask. Like, if you were to say, I don't like how that's happening, I would, you know, you say in the nice way, obviously, you know, but even if you say it in that nice way, are you afraid to even say it? And that's the question we ask. Like, do you have a voice? And to learn to trust yourself, right? Like if something feels off, I'm not saying call anything off, but look into it. Talk to a mental health professional. Call our hotline. Like, don't ignore things. Because when you talk to the victims, they'll say, the survivors, they'll say, yeah, he didn't, all my friends weren't good enough. My family wasn't good enough. And, you know, I was really isolated. And what happens with isolation, which is a really big red flag, is that when you're ready to get help, you have no one to talk to. Mm-hmm. And unless your family is really extraordinary, they may really be hurt that you haven't been in touch with them, right? Mm-hmm. So it's this really sad cycle where if you don't call your sister ever and your friends aren't good enough, when you're ready to say something doesn't feel well, they don't, you know, people are natural, you know, they want to have reciprocity. So when people call me saying, I'm really concerned to my sister and she's not calling me, I'll say, you know, this is the time where you have to kind of rise beyond like the relationship. Like you have to always put your hand out and you have to get from other relationships because she may not be able to connect to you right now. But when she's able to, you need to be the lifeline. And it's really hard. But the isolation is a huge, I would say, huge part of it. Possessiveness,
isolation,
jealousy.
Jealousy in what way? Jealousy.
You're looking at that other guy, and you're not looking at that other guy, but like you're you know, this constant jealousy, accusatory, and those things people do see in dating and in their courtship and their engagement. Now, in our communities, there's a whole range of how people date, right, and a whole range of how people get engaged. So, you know, it may be that they only meet a few times and they might not have opportunity. And then I'd say early in the marriage, if something feels off, I say that for everybody: call us, call someone that you trust. We use this language of bump it up. If you tell someone you think they're not getting it, find the next person that might get it, right? Mm-hmm. So you know, we do a lot of training with kalot teachers, you know, tell them to be like that lifeline to people. But if some kalot teacher can't, like some people they're really good at halacha, you know, like that's what they're good at. But if you're going to your college teacher and they don't seem to get it, so go to someone else's college teacher. Go, you know, obviously I'm a social worker. I would say go to a mental health professional, but go where you feel heard. In an engagement, or you're dating someone and you get that feeling, just don't ignore it. Like, trust yourself. It does not mean stop the relationship. I'm not telling people, but investigate, explore. You know, is it normal nervousness or is something really not feeling right? And get the support to make that decision. You know, we recently did a dating workshop. It's on our website. And we thought it was really successful because the next day we got 14 or 15 calls to our hotline saying, I'm in a relationship right now. I just want to talk to you about it. We didn't tell anybody to break up. Not our stance at all. Good. Let's talk about it. What do you feel? What's going on? What triggered you in that workshop that made you feel like you need to call? Mm-hmm. And let's talk about it. Where can you go for more support? and really opening it up. And then, in a relationship, when you are married and there's something that doesn't feel right, again, like find support. I think one thing that COVID has done for us, a lot of things I think that have been very challenging, but one of the things is that, like, I think we all know it's okay not to be okay all the time. Like, it's hard. It's really hard. And that we need to support each other. And, if we're going to take away some of the lessons of the last 6 months or 5.5 months, however long we've been inside, is that, like, we need to find the right support for ourselves. And, that's, I just talked a lot, but that's.
No, there's so much that I didn't even know where to begin, but can we just go back to the warning signs? Because I think that this is important to cover for whoever's listening. You said isolation, possessiveness, jealousy. Are there any other warning signs that people should look out for, that they can call your hotline or message you?
I mean, you'd be amazed how many people, even from our community, where there was physical and sexual assaults during engagement. And there's so much shame around that. There's such deep shame that they hold so much responsibility around that they don't call. And to know that whatever you do, it is not your fault. Is
it shame because they're scared, they don't want people to know they were physical? Like,
a lot of times
it's like, well,
if I allowed myself to be not Shomer Nagia to X, right? And you can't see my hand, X. And, he pushed it without and I feel bad that we went to Y and Z. I can't admit it because I allowed X, right? Or there's something about me, even if I didn't allow it and he pushed anyway, there's something about me that allowed it, or now I'm kind of damaged. I'm not supposed to have engaged in that. And it becomes a cycle of such deep shame, right? That we're afraid to say, hey, this happened to me, and I need help. And so many people I've worked with, there are the subtle signs of jealousy, possessiveness, isolation, talking down to people, not letting her have a voice, no decision making, right? You're making wedding plans. Do you both get to make decisions? If you do have an argument, you do argue with your spouse. I mean, that's normal, right? How do you argue? So those are those signs. But we've seen, like, clear, blatant signs. And they will say in retrospect, like, there was, but I didn't know who to tell. I was embarrassed to tell. I was afraid if I pursued it, I would never get married, right? And then I'll never have children. So better to get married, have a child or two, and I'll deal with it, which is not better. I feel comfortable doing that. It's not better. It's really complicated. Certainly, if you're in the relationship, you have a child, the child's a blessing, and you can move, but it to
makes things harder. Yeah.
It makes things very complicated. So we certainly see that in the relationship. And again, I know it sounds very kind of ambiguous, but, like, trust yourself. Like, if something feels off, I'm not saying call anything off, but I'm saying be curious of why it feels off. Is it because I have anxiety about commitment? Okay, be curious about it. Figure that out. Is it because he reminds me of my father who I have a bad relationship with? Okay, be curious. Resolve it. Is it because he really is very controlling and disrespectful to me? Okay, let's figure out what the resolution should be. But, like, you're allowed to be, I think about that often. Like, why is it not sitting right? And it does not mean engagement has to feel like fairy tale-like. It doesn't, and it isn't. And if people are real about it, it's not. But, is there dread? Is there, true discomfort?
What do you think of people when they're experiencing these things, that instead of going to a qualified professional, they go to, let's say, their mom or someone who's biased, like someone who, like, wants the relationship to happen, who thinks it's, like, perfect, or they go to the rabbi or the rabbi's wife.
Right. I mean, listen, I think everybody, what's the best? I think it's hard to get good guidance from someone who's we talk about Nogea B'Davar, like, who's really in it with you. That doesn't mean they can't be part of your support system. And certainly we can have another conversation about, like, how do you be a support system? And I don't know that we'll go there today, but, like, but it is, you want to go with someone who can give you perspective, right? You want to be able to share your experience with someone. And people have a hard time seeing. Now, I think it is so scary to talk about domestic violence. It's still one of those things that really is so scary. I spoke to someone very recently, who's within my world, and she was sharing that a family member was going through this. And I stopped the conversation. I want to say, you're not the only one that has called me. Like it's, it's everywhere. It's not only in in that community or that community, and you fill it in because I don't want to do that, but like that's the standard. It'll be like, oh, it's in that very da-da-da community. No, it's in your community. It is. And once you start seeing it, you see it everywhere. And you'll remember these stories as a child going, oh, that's what really happened in that family. Like it exists, and not to stigmatize it, you know, that we all, so we go back to like, who should you go to? Who's the qualified person? Listen, I'm here as a licensed mental health professional. Do I do everything perfectly? No. Do my colleagues do everything perfectly? No. But we do have the training and perspective to help people think things through, hopefully with an objective perspective. And a trauma-informed lens. Like we hope that that's what are there incredible Rebbitzins, rabbis, parents, sisters that can do that? Yeah, there are some really good people out there. You just want to make sure you're going to people who get it, right? And that's where the bump it up, I was just said before, like if they're not getting it, move on. Like doesn't mean they can't be really supportive about other things, but if they're not getting you, you know, our Jewish community has resources. We're here for you.
Yes. I have a question.
Yes.
Is there a certain type of person that attracts this type of abuse? You know, you hear it all the time, like, oh, because they're codependent, quote unquote, they attract another codependent.
Right. I always, you know, I think there are experts who will talk about like the makeup of the survivor and the makeup of the abuser. And I try to refrain from that conversation because it feels very fatalistic to me, right? Like I'll often hear people say, well, he grew up in a home like that, so of course he did that. No, like we all have, either we call it free will, we all have self-determination. In our Jewish world, we talk about bechira, however you know, your perspective of it, like, you know, you conceptualize it. So are there certain people, you know, we'll use this language of, you know, repeat or repair. A lot of times people either repeat a relationship they saw or they have to do some repairing or healing, right, to be in another relationship. Certainly that's true, but it is not an like perfect correlation. So my message to people around that is if you saw it in your house, it does not mean you're destined for it, either as being the abuser or being the victim, right? Like if you had it happen to you once, does not mean your next relationship has to do that, but let's get you some repair, right?
Got it.
So if you're a young man, and I mean, I hate to be like gender specific, but if you're a young man and you saw behaviors in your house that make you like feel like, oh, my dad or my mom behaved that certain way and I don't want to fall into that. So get support about making sure that you have accountability about that you feel that you don't want you don't behave in that way. And if you're a young woman and you saw that behavior and you don't want to either be the abuser or the victim, so get support before you're in a relationship. You know, if you're in college, I think college is a great time. Like, and it's usually really inexpensive. If you're in college, they have counseling centers. Like I've taught a lot of graduate interns, and I'll say to them, not as a requirement, hey, you could probably get free sessions right now. Go talk to someone for a semester, right? Like it's normal for young adults to get some support. Like work through that issue so that you don't have to do the repeat repair. So that's my evasive way of saying there is certainly self-determination and there's always hope. There's always hope.
Always hope. Yes, I love that. But I think this comes when someone has that self-awareness. If someone grows up in a household and yes, they see all these things, but they don't really think much of it.
Right.
And then, you know, they graduate high school, they go to college, and then there's that pressure to get married. Oh, you have to get married, just get married. They get married, they quote unquote fall in love and la-di-da. And then all of a sudden it's like, uh-oh, like, what is this? This is not the fairy tale I envisioned. So what do you advise to young singles before they're dating, while they're dating, to, you know, date productively and date with like that self-awareness? So
having me here today is part of that, right? We're giving words to things, and it really is. And we go into schools because we want young people, young adults and youth to have language for it. So we get like, you know, the feedback on it will say like, I never thought about my parents' divorce in this way. This is what happened, you know, like, right. And we'll
like
often have
putting a word to it.
To give words to it. You know, Dr. Pelkowitz always says, name the monster is basically how we conquer the monster. Let's name it, right? So that's really important. If you're dating, you know, dating in our community is very serious. It can be very serious. So
or
get
not.
or not, but there's a lot of pressure, even if you're not serious, right? And so if you're someone who could have, every community calls it something different, but a mentor, someone who can help you think things through. But education is really a big part of it. And then when you're engaged or in a relationship, we offer one type of course. It's not a domestic violence course. It isn't, but it is a couples communication course. And I'll tell you.
Shalom workshop? Yeah. I took that like 3 times.
Okay, really? Okay.
Yes, I loved it. I took it once when I was engaged, and then I brought it to my community actually 2 times. Oh, wow. I loved it.
Do it again. Be an instructor. And it's but what happens with Shalom Workshop, which teaches like communication skills, conflict resolution skills, is that sometimes couples will be there and our trainer will be like, something feels off. Mm-hmm. And the trainer will pull one of them aside and say, listen, maybe you want to explore something, not judging, and we'll help them get the other, support. And it doesn't mean people should get breaking up or divorced. We don't tell people what to do, but people need to see what's going on. People really, we want to help people see what's going on and be empowered to make choices. I've certainly worked with survivors who have remained in the relationship for, my longest standing one was probably 14 years. I worked with her.
Wow.
But that was her choice. So our work, and we're talking almost weekly therapy, was about how does she stay safe in there and how does she feel empowered, as empowered as she can in a safe way. If that means, making the tea she likes sounds simple to you and I, but not being forced into things like that, that's how she was able to express herself. And then eventually she was able to leave the marriage in a fairly peaceful way. The kids had left, whatever that situation was, but that's how she decided to do it. People make lots of different choices, and that's really, and we support anyone's choices, but we want them to be safe and to realize their choices, right? There are choices. People be self-aware. We should, as a community anyway, not domestic, help people, in that age range, take some introspection. The end goal is not the wedding. The end goal is healthy marriages.
Healthy marriages is the end goal, not the wedding.
Right? The wedding is
I tell my colleagues all the time.
Good for you. Right?
All the focus is on the wedding, and I'm saying that's not the goal. That's just the beginning. It's really the celebration.
Right, and it's beautiful. You should enjoy it, and you should feel like a princess and beautiful. But the real goal is when you can look back and say, wow, that was just the beginning, and things are good. Things are good. We know how to fight. Yes. And we know how to get along, and we can laugh together, and we can get through those hard times.
So one thing I notice with people, I hear quite often through different circles, like, I never fight with my husband. Like, I never fought. Like, oh, like, we're fine.
Right.
So what do you say about that, the no conflict type of marriages?
So
is that problematic?
Do you think it's even true? Like, can that possibly be true?
I do know of someone.
Really?
Yes, I know someone who had to break off a relationship, and she said they never ever fought. So when they broke the relationship, everyone was surprised.
Right.
Like, they didn't see anything.
I don't know that I have a comment about that. Like, okay. I don't know that that's the goal either. Like, a no conflict relationship. There would be probably theorists out there and therapists say, well, there's not a lot of energy there. I wonder what that's like to have, like, none of that. Some level of tension is not particularly bad. There's like some level of anxiety, like some level of being curious about each other's differences. Like, that's how, like, Gottman would talk about it, right? Like, how to be curious about each other's differences. There's no research to say that people who are different have worse marriages. Sometimes they have better marriages. So I don't know if there isn't.
The way you fight. It's the way you fight. There will be arguments.
Right. The way you fight, the way you can respect each other, hold each other in those really hard times. That's what determines a marriage. It's not, but what resonated when you said that to me was like how, and this is not a Jewish or Orthodox issue, is how sacred marriage is. And I think about this often, and how there's there is this incredible, like opaqueness around it. I don't know if that makes sense, but like
opaqueness, you said?
Opaqueness, like there's no transparency, right? Like this is not, I think our community probably has it a little bit more just because of our sensitivity, what we consider tznius or tzniut or modest, however you think about it. But I think that there's such sanctity and like kind of like value to the idea of marriage that sometimes there's no transparency of like really what it's like. And people don't tell each other.
No.
Like, how many times do you actually tell your friends, I really fought with my husband this weekend. I'm sick of him. Like nobody says that, but how many of us have experienced that? Like,
Right.
I mean,
There are people that do, that are very comfortable.
Right, but we don't really talk that way. And maybe we shouldn't. I'm not saying we should, but like, I don't think people are real in general about the challenge of being married, the beauty of being married, but that there's challenges, and we don't know what it's like. I mean, it's different for all of us, right? It's very different for all of us. But I think when someone says there's no conflict, I kind of wonder, like, well, okay, I don't know what that means. Maybe you're just both kind of
like, we never ever fight. I'm like,
okay. I can think of one friend that said it to me, but I was kind of like, they almost fight about not fighting. I'm like, just have a fight already. Like, and I've said that to them, like, come on, go ahead. Not to like, but doesn't listen to this. But she'll laugh. But I mean, I don't think that is the ideal. But I do think that part of like the challenge around domestic violence and getting help, or when there's other problems, like other real problems, is that we don't talk about things. My doctoral research, which is not the conversation for tonight, was around people's college class experience and their first experience of intimacy in their marriage, right? So how do traditional Orthodox women experience learning really their sexual education and their first experience being sexually active, and that transition. And one of the themes I discovered is that people don't know what to expect, okay, but at the same time, they don't go for help for a very long time, because they are so fearful. And then we're not talking about domestic violence, we're talking about, sexual discomfort and pain. They're so fearful to even say it to anyone, right? Like they did, and if we would just say, and I'm sure you as a college teacher does say that, and many of the more equipped college teachers say, like, for some people it's painful beyond like, normal adjustment. And these are the different things that could be, and you need to address it. Like, you deserve to address this. Right? Like,
of course.
And I think those kind of, when we don't just say it out loud, it's giving permission to have the whole range of experience, then how can people come forward? They think that they're just, so if this is happening in my marriage and a fight feels worse than it needs to be, where would I go just to say it out loud? And that's what happens at Shalom Task Force. I've had the privilege over COVID, because of staffing and volunteer issues, we've had to pivot. I take a lot of the hotline calls.
You take them?
I don't always. You won't get me if you call, and we don't tell people who really answers, but I could tell you that as executive director, sometimes I cover, and I'm comfortable saying that. And people know I work there. And a lot of times the very courageous people that call will say, this is the first time I'm able to share this out loud. I don't want to go anywhere with it, but this is what happened. And that's the whole phone call. Wow. But just saying it out loud gives it, power, and you get to share it.
Yes. Is it anonymous? So
absolutely anonymous. No caller ID. There's no way of me knowing who you are unless
people don't have to say their name.
They do not have to say their name. We do ask people to give us a name, so when they call back, we can look back, so they'll have to tell their story. But we have a lot of Sarahs, because everybody just picks a Jewish name. Like, we really know absolutely nothing about you unless you choose to share something. So it's completely anonymous. And the advocates that answer will never tell anybody that they're on the call, so you'll never know who it is. I feel comfortable sharing I am, because I'm an employee, and you can see me on the website, but I'm also a licensed professional, so obviously absolutely confidential. But and people, it's really a lot of times people just calling them for the first time in their lives saying, something's wrong, I don't know where to go. And we're like, well, we're here for you. Just what's going on? What made you call today? Right?
And are they able to call multiple times?
Many times as they want.
So it's like a therapy session in a way?
No, not therapy. It's not therapy. It's supportive listening. It's often safety planning. It's referrals to therapy, but it's really much more on validation, supportive listening, and direction. Like, this is where you can go. This is one way of thinking about it. This is a book to read. But we're certainly not there as mental health professionals, though some of us may be. And you call as often as you want. You may get someone else answering, because people are on different shifts. And if you did share a name, they can find your record, but you don't have to tell them you called before. Or they might not be able to find it in that moment, and that's okay. You could just share what you want to share that day. So I mentioned before with COVID, so unfortunately there's been a real increase of incidences, and we can imagine why, because people are trapped at home. And that's not an excuse for it, but people who are already kind of in the abusive continuum seem to have increased. And so we opened in the last 2 weeks a text chat WhatsApp line. That's fully answered by staff at this point. And it's been interesting, because it's been a way for people who for whatever reason can't say it out loud. Either they really don't want to talk about it at home, they're afraid of someone hearing, or they're just not ready to say it. There's something about that to text and what's going on, and they're in touch with people, and they're getting support that way. And it's also just a way of getting information. I'd say 40% of our calls are from family members and friends.
Yeah.
You know, so if you're concerned about someone, we're a place for you to call and say, I'm concerned about my sister, what do I do? I'm concerned about my cousin, you know, whatever. And we can help someone that. So we also try to, you know, one of our taglines is really to build supportive community. Right? How do we build community? We help people think about how to be supportive. You know.
So from your callers, how often do you get male callers reporting their abuse from their wives? Do you see it? Do you see it? We know we speak a lot about men being abusive towards women.
I think
about the other way around.
I think of our callers, it was 8% of our calls last year. I don't know if that's perfect, but it's around 8%. But I don't want to say that that's everyone. Like, domestic violence is underreported. Domestic violence of men is even more underreported. We can think about why. First of all, people assume, you know, like it's emasculating, right? And I hate to use gender word like that, but like it is emasculating. People don't believe them. How is it possible? And you'll hear from people, and this isn't from when I was doing more direct treatment. I was a therapist of a male victim, and he was a big guy, you know, and he's like, I'm like, you're really scared. He was really scared of her. He goes, I don't want to ever hit back. Like, I don't want to be that person.
Wow.
Right. And so how did he decide to move on, you know, and how does he stay safe when he doesn't want to do that? And will people believe him? Right. Will people believe him?
I also think that women who do that kind of feel like they have the right to do it because they're women. Maybe.
That's interesting. I haven't thought about it that way.
No, because you know, there's this double standard because I'm allowed to do whatever I want because it's like this whole like feminist thing that might, I don't know.
You know, I think it's always interesting because the minute we hear a male hurting a woman, we call him an abuser.
Yes.
We hear of a woman hurting a male, we say, oh, she must be mentally ill. That's the typical thing, right? Like, there's an excuse for her behavior, but his behavior is inexcusable. Both behaviors are inexcusable.
Got it. Yes,
right?
exactly.
It's inexcusable. And if you happen to have a mental illness, right, either male or female, treat your mental illness. Get the support you need about your mental illness. Do not be abusive. And if you happen to have a mental illness and you're being abused, that's not a reason he or she's allowed to abuse you. And I've seen that also when I've worked with patients who've had severely and persistently mental illness. They had their own diagnoses prior to the marriage, and as if that's the reason they deserve to be abused. No, I don't care how mentally ill you are. You deserve treatment for your mental illness, and you deserve not to be abused. And there's no excuse. There's no reason. COVID is not an excuse. Substance is not an excuse. Unemployment is not an excuse. Now, they're all risk factors. So that's, you know, but none of that is an excuse for someone hurting someone else. And we would say that to our kids. Like, you know, we have young kids. Like, it doesn't matter what someone does. We don't hit, right?
Exactly. Right.
We don't hurt. We get support someone else to come in. And that's, you know, something we have to hold everybody to that.
Have you ever seen a situation where maybe many situations that the abuse actually got worked out? Or does it always end up in a divorce or separation?
Not always end up in divorce. I would say many times it does not end up in divorce.
Even with like physical abuse, years of abuse?
No way of knowing. I mean, like on a real like prevalence study kind of idea, we had no idea really what exists out there. Listen, I have a very skewed vision, and I'm very aware of that. Like, people who have come to me, I'm often the therapist of last resort. They've already gone to Shalom Bias therapist, they've gone to good couples counselor, and then they're coming to me. So my view is I see a lot of people who have already separated and divorced. That is not what exists out there. People live in lots of different situations, and they're like entitled to live in any situation they want and be as safe as it can be and get support. Can it be worked out? I firmly believe, as a therapist and as a Jew, if I could say that, is that people can make changes in their lives. Do I think that it's safe to do that when you're in the relationship and there's active DV? Probably not. Like I think you need to go to I think the person who abuses, and we try to move away from the abuser. The person that hurt, the person that abuses, needs very skilled treatment, which is not something I'm equipped to do. I don't work with the perpetrator. You need to get good treatment. You need to have accountability. There needs to be support. the primary, like the initial work has to be around safety and then the rest of it. So from like just like kind of a literature perspective and hearing academic work around it, it's often very much like, let's first stabilize the family. Let's get them separate. They're independent work. Independent. She does healing as she's the victim. He does whatever work he needs to do, which may include some healing, whatever, and then maybe there's a test run, maybe there's real accountability. So I will never say it's never possible. I would say that it's highly unlikely that in a very abusive family, with high level conflict, remain together and they somehow work it out, and there's like, they could still stay together. I'm not saying they don't stay together. I'm saying, like, would it really transition to a home of like healthy, safe? I find that hard to believe. But can people make it happen? Yes, they can.
Yeah.
People can make it happen. But I hope I'm not going to be heard out there saying, yes, it takes a tremendous amount of work, dedication, commitment, and accountability. Accountability is a very big word, because if our primary goal is for safety, we want to make sure they're accountable to keep the other person safe, right? So it's never come back to, oh, she triggered me. No, you're always responsible to be safe in your behavior. So, the few programs that work out there, there's a program out of NYU, restorative justice program. There's a few programs that do the work. Their primary goal is always around accountability. Like, who in that world, but I'm not an expert on that. And I know my lane. Like and if people want to go on that, I'll refer out. But often it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. Right.
And people could do that.
Right.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, do you have a message for our listeners on how they can prevent something like this from happening? I know you were talking about the warning signs, right? But do those warning signs also exist in dating? What's your message for people out there? What can they do?
Let's just talk about it. That's my message. Let's just talk about it. Let it be a conversation. Though that it is so important to name what's going on. And I think I said it before, like education is really education and prevention. I would love I would love if that was the only thing we had to do at Shalom Task Force.
Education and prevention.
I wish our hotline was not necessary. I wish our legal services, I wish our only place was to go out there and teach people how to have healthy relationships, and we wouldn't need it any longer. And I believe that everyone is capable of being in a healthy relationship if they're able to take care of themselves and do the work. But they have to do that work, right? We don't want people being abusive. But I think if we would all focus on education, I think if we would teach our children about domestic violence, about abuse, about power and control, like have the conversations with them. And those are hard conversations to have. But if your young daughter is starting to date, to talk to her about it, to talk about it in high school. We do a high school workshop and we send out a letter to parents, letting them know what we talked about. And so rarely do parents reach out to us. We say, we'll do a parent workshop for you at the same time. It rarely happens, right?
Something I'm noticing, actually. I see that most of these workshops and classes, not specific to Shalom Task Force, but in general, I feel like a lot of it is geared to women only. I noticed the women flocking to the dating classes and running to the shiurim about how to build healthy relationships. Like, women in general, like, I hate to stereotype, but I find that they're more into this and they want to work on it. So how does something like this work? How do you build a healthy marriage and relationship when the guy's like,
so
in another dimension?
We got to get your male colleagues, your chatan teachers involved. But we have a male social worker on staff, Yeshaya Krause, and the same week we do a dating workshop for the women. We right away we advertise together a dating workshop for men. Like, we go into boys' schools, as many that will take us. We have a dating workshop for boys and for the base measures programs. Because first of all, we talked about before, they could also be the victims, right? And we all have to have the language. We all have to have the framework to say, we want healthy relationships. We want a relationship that has equality, and I'm not talking about what you're talking about, We want one without power and control dynamic that's unbalanced. And, we want to be relationships like that. And we'll do it from a different hashkafa. Like we have, some will come from a yeshiva hashkafa for communities that will bring text from, real religious text to talk about why is this an important value as Torah people, and some people don't need that kind of background, and that's fine. But how do we all embrace it? And so we need men. We need, they talk about this like male ally world. We need men to say, this is also important to me. I often think it's, you talk to men, you're like, you don't want your daughter to be in this, right? That's like where the heartstrings are.
Yes. Yeah.
But, you don't want your daughter, but you don't want your son either. You don't want your son to be hurt. You don't want your son to hurt others. You don't. And nobody does. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. So how do we give you tools? How do we give you tools? Invite us into your base medrash. Invite us into your school. Let us do a dating workshop. When, young men are starting to date after many years of learning and, matters in the community, they have very little experience working with, like talking to women. They really don't, right? And like, how do we help them think about it? Like, how do you?
Yeah, but then vice versa, like the other communities who are less religious, maybe they do talk to the opposite gender, but
and
they don't learn.
It's not the same. And I'm not saying it's more in one.
And they don't know how to respect a woman,
So and how do we help them talk about women? How do we make sure they don't objectify women? We need to have these conversations.
Exactly.
And all of us, we're all community leaders. We all have people that we have impact on, right? We all can be ambassadors. So when you hear a podcast like this and you bring this up, right? You bring this up. So have the conversation, even at your Shabbat table, even, at the park when you're hanging out with the other moms or dads, say, listen to this interesting podcast. I always think about like if all of us could walk away from these conversations and talk to 3 or 4 people, right? What kind of influence can we have? Right? What is the ripple effects? It's not only domestic violence. We think about substance abuse, about sexual assault. If we're just willing, the same thing about marriage. If we're willing to just be real. Like it's going to exist in every community. Let's just make it work together.
About it. Yeah.
It makes us better.
Wow.
It makes us better. I don't know. Thank you.
Shana, thank you. You are so wonderful. And God bless you and Shalom Task Force and everything good that you're doing for the Jewish community and all minority communities. Shalom Task Force is like a beacon of light for everyone. Guys, how can people reach you?
So our website's great. We just redid it. Team, come look at it. It's a great reference. www.shalomtaskforce.org, and I have to read the numbers because but it's you call us either at 718-337-3700 or our call text WhatsApp line is 888-883-2323.
888-883-2323.
We are not 24/7. If there's an emergency like that, we can't, we don't manage that. Our text line's open Monday through Thursday till midnight. So we are open a lot of hours. We get back to people if they want to get back. We want to get back. So call, text, chat, WhatsApp. Doesn't have to be an emergency. Just be if you want to just kind of talk it out with someone that will give you some perspective and listen. We're here. We're here for you.
Amazing. Thank you. This is wonderful organization, and I really, really hope whoever's listening to this, and if they see anything and they just want to talk about it, doesn't have to be domestic abuse per se, but even just something that they find problematic in their relationship or something that they're unsure of and they're anxious about and they don't know who to talk to, they have Shalom Task Force as a resource. So thank you so much again.
Thank you. Real pleasure to be here. I'm happy this worked out.
Pleasure was all mine. Thank God. Thanks again.
Yeah.
Bye.